with this guy yesterday who is a big triathlon coach. Like
Hmm.
he competed at like semi-professional triathlon and like now he coaches professional triathlons, but he was a professor and researcher for 30 years. So he has like over 150, you know, published research papers.
Articles and
And I
papers.
was like, what do you think about science-based training? He goes, it's everything. And I could ask you that question now too, because I feel like if people look at you, they're like, oh my gosh, here's like this huge guy. But
Yeah.
like you're very intelligent, you're very science backed. So where does that balance line come in for you?
Well, when I was first wanting to get into this field, I always admired the Soviet system of training. And one of the major reasons for that was if you look at a guy that was basically one of the foundational members of the Soviet Union's training philosophy was A.S. Medvedev. And A.S. Medvedev was not only a professor and a PhD in kinesiology or whatever field they had over there, he was a gold medalist as well in Olympic lifting. And I think that gave him a much better understanding of the training modalities that were going to be needed in order to push the human bodies to the absolute limits. And I find that that's interesting over here is that we either go one way or the other. Most of the science based guys are not world class lifters, and a lot of the world class lifters don't have any education in the situation. So I think that's a huge separation that even 60 and 50 years ago that the Soviet Union had on top of us was the application of the science was distant, like they just didn't have the farm to table athlete type development that we should be seeing over here now, but we don't. And I think that's what causes a huge issue with being able to take the information and apply it, but also on the scientific side, study things that actually matter. I think that's a huge issue we have as well as we have a lot of people that have the power or the means to be able to study things, but maybe they're not really relevant for what's going on in the field. Or one of the biggest things that, as you well know, is the subject type of who they're using. If you look at a lot of the current, I'd say in the last 5 to 8 years, hypertrophy, let's just use hypertrophy since that's kind of the big thing. Hypertrophy studies are utilizing recreationally trained athletes that are just getting beginner gains. And so you're seeing rep ranges getting changed and people going, well, this research paper says that it sets a 10 or best, and this one says it doesn't matter, and this one says heavier is better, like sets a 5 or 6. And the reason there's so much white noise on that area is because the subjects that they're utilizing for those studies are probably not much more than beginners. And so I find that beginner gains are pretty easy. You just train and you get better. Once those beginner gains are gone, I'd say after the first 2 to 4 years of development and you start knocking on your genetic potential is where you start finding the real information. And if you look at a lot of the old Eastern Bloc literature, that's where the real research started, is when they got guys up to national or international levels. And then they were able to study how they were reacting to training. And that's where A.S. Medvedev came up with the first concurrent or conjugate system of training, because what he realized was is once somebody gets really good at something, their ability to physically and mentally burn out becomes so much more in tuned and a negative. And so if you're rotating methodology or rep ranges or exercises or loading parameters, a lot of those things, if they're done correctly, can elicit a higher gain in your training. But the problem is that um, you have to have a decent amount of equipment and knowledge to be able to understand when to rotate what and how it's going to affect the body. And that's why even at 46, I still train really hard, is to make sure that what I'm thinking is being applied to what I'm doing. It has nothing to do with ego anymore. I mean, I've already broken multiple world records for over like 3 decades. It's more, I want to stay in touch with the training and not lose capacity to understand science to actual application. And that's where I think we're missing a lot of that in the sector of strength conditioning now. I mean, somebody was asking me a couple of months ago, like who the head strength coach of like the Detroit Lions was, and I had no idea. And I think that we should be holding some of those people in very, very high regard. They should have insanely high, not only academia, but also applied research because they're training some of the best athletes on the entire planet. And what you find is a lot of those jobs are not treated as serious as they should be, as far as I think the accolades that need to be presented for those jobs.
That's a really interesting consideration you just put at the end there. Because if I were to put out an episode and say, hey, this is the head strength and conditioning coach for the New York Mets or the Philadelphia Phillies or something, people be like, oh my God, what? But like you and me having been in that field, it's pretty unforgiving. I mean, you're making 40K a year. You're like, what's like the saying, like your shoes are tied at 5 a.m. Not like you're getting up at 5 a.m. Shoes are tied at 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just, I mean, it's exhausting being a strength coach. But as you said, it doesn't matter almost like if you're training high school, college, professional sports, that's incredibly important. There's a lot of science that goes into that. And there's like always ever changing variables. And even with the sport of like football, I think it's a great example is you have the smalls, you have the bigs, you have the special teams, you have the position players, and everyone's going to be different on each day of the week. And you can't just have some cookie cutter program.
No.
It needs to be a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah, what I find is, a lot of getting those athletes to perform at a high level comes back down to recovery processes, right? And being able to train them hard enough in the off season to where they're able to withstand harder training more so in the in season. Well, here it becomes the big problem in professional sports. Once their season is over, I would say 85 to 90% of the team are not required to stay at the area where the strength coach can have their hands on them in the off season, which is the most important time for them to develop and get better. There's no year-round process. You find a handful of guys like, it's going to show my age, but like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, like those guys were in training the next day after a world championship or after, a conference game. And those are the guys that we remember as some of the top people in sports. But a lot of pro athletes are not wired that way because they were the best in high school. Then they became the best in college, which means they got babied instead of gotten worked hard. And that's why you find, I don't know the exact percentage amount, but 50 to 60% at least of the NFL is from smaller schools. And a lot of it's because the smaller school guys have to work harder to prove their worth. And they're developing in those ages of 18 to 22, where I feel weight training is insanely important for progression in sport. Whereas guys at maybe Ohio State, Alabama, etc., might just be getting used for their talents and abilities, and they're not really getting any better. I remember 15 years ago, Louis Simmons and I would walk into different college places. I mean, I can't even remember the names of them, and even some pro teams. And we would walk in, and you couldn't tell the difference between somebody that had been there 3 weeks and somebody that had been there 3 to 5 years. They were all the same capacity, which Louis and I thought was interesting, that you would get a guy and have them for 3 whole years and they wouldn't get any better. Right. And then you don't realize that, well, they don't have them in control in the off season, and their work ethic may not be up to par to actually train hard enough in the gym to get better. And a lot of it's just a political game, right? Like a lot of the guys that get in the strength conditioning spots are friends of an offensive coordinator or a head coach, or maybe they came from the school that they came from, and so what you find is it's not who's best, it's kind of like who's available and who's willing to go work 60, 80 hours a week for really not that great of money, especially at the start. I mean, I think the last time I looked at the top level college and pros, there's probably less than 75 jobs that make over $250,000 a year in strength conditioning. I would say that would be a fair number. So a lot of the great strength coaches have split off and privatized. Myself, Joe DeFranco, Gunnar Peterson, Don Saladino, a lot of the guys that I personally know that work for themselves, they've taken control of their own, ability to make money instead of being locked into a salary with a team or a college.
And I almost think, like, almost unfortunately, that's sort of the way to go. And a lot of my students will ask me, they're like, oh, like, what's the whole CSCS behind your name mean? I'm like, well, it's a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And I'm like, I loved studying for the exam. I loved my time as a strength and conditioning coach in grad school, but I'd rather not do that on my feet 60 to 80 hours a week. And it's like unfortunate saying that because as we know, it's like it is such an important job and it can be so exciting. So that I'd rather kind of like sell out a little bit and do the entrepreneurial thing, but really help the people who want to be helped and who want to take their game upwards. And it's
Yeah.
funny, it reminds me when you said that how are you familiar with Devontae Smith? He's the wide
Hmm.
receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yep.
The Slim Reaper. He's so fast and he doesn't drop balls. And they kind of joke around that he doesn't really work that hard in the weight room. And then you have like Saquon Barkley, who the dude is like, he could probably be like a power lifter if like he really put his mind to it. Like he could probably power lift. He dude is really strong. And he blew out his ACL like I don't know 3 to 5 years ago. And he was doing this whole documentary, which is now on Amazon Prime. And he was saying that that was his first adversity. He was like, when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, I was playing Pop Warner football. He was like, I was the best one and I didn't even know it. He was just scoring touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. And he goes, blowing out his ACL in the New York Giants was the only adversity he ever faced. So what now? And like, I almost kind of wish people had adversity like you were talking about, coming from a small school, because their mountain to climb is so much higher than someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huge issue and something that strikes home very well with me. And I say this a lot on different podcasts, but a lot of people still don't know that when I was 6 years old, 2 weeks before I started first grade, I got hit by a drunk driver on my bicycle, and it broke my right leg in 6 places, my left in four, and shattered my pelvis. And so I was homeschooled and bedridden for entire first grade. And I remember starting to want the weightlifting, weight training process around 12. I'm at the grocery store with my mom and looking at magazines, and I see that, this is about the time where the next season football was going to start with actual pads. And I wanted to play, but my running was not very good because my legs hurt so bad to run. And I thought, well, maybe if just actually by accident, I was thinking, well, maybe if I lift weights, maybe that'll make my legs not hurt to run. And then I ended up falling in love with lifting weights. But the point being is that the adversity to climb out of that first ability to squat 300 or 400, which if I don't think I would have had my legs broken, I think would have come a lot easier, but it would have also not given me the work ethic to want to push really hard. And so by the time I'm in close to 20, I'm so like OCD with working out that, I won my first world championships. I'd squatted 700 as a teenager, benched 500. But keeping in mind that I started lifting at 12, and probably in that entire time, 12 to 20 in 8 years, I'd only missed 2 weeks of working out total. And that was the work ethic I knew was there to be able to be really, really good. But I think the determination came from being so far behind and understanding that I was going to have to work harder to get better because I had all those issues as a child. And so that kind of gave me the work ethic that if I wanted to be anything in weightlifting or football or whatever, is that I was going to have to work insanely hard to get that. So I understand what you're saying with that is sometimes if your adversity comes really young, it actually resets the course of your entire life.
Like I almost don't. It's funny. My niece is like 5, and she's like, "Oh, we did this race in gym class, and I'm the fastest one in my class." I said, "That's awesome. That's amazing. Like, let's start running marathons." But I was like, a part of me was like, I kind of wish you were the slowest
Hmm.
because I was the slowest. I was like this kind of little bit of a chubby kid growing up, and like I wanted to like play in the NBA, and I'm only 5'9", and I was like, "Dad, I'm going to be 7 feet tall. I'm going to dunk a basketball." And he goes, "No, you're not." But it was like I was the kid who was diving all over the floor. I'd have to wear like a second shirt because I would sweat so much because I was working so hard. And I think that set me on a good path. And it seems like the same thing as you. It's like I've personally, I'm not like huge into like the powerlifting strength sports, but hearing those numbers as you were a teenager is absolutely bananas to me to hear
Yeah.
that. And I've like
Well, I
followed
mean,
some of your work and I'm like, holy
that
crap.
was crazy. Like I remember getting that strength got me a taste of my first strength conditioning environment. Channel 6 News from Indianapolis had come up to do a story on me because I had just won that world championships. They were like, "We need to do something really cool that the average person can think of." I'm like, "Well, while you're talking about my accomplishments in lifting, I can be in the background doing 225 for reps, not even thinking anything of it, but knowing that there's a camera on me. At 19, I do 45 reps with 225 on camera, and the Indianapolis Colts see it, and they're like, this fucking dude is stronger than the people in the combine at 19. And so it got the attention of John Torine, which was the strength coach for the Colts for like 17 years. And he goes, man, you ought to come down and do a job shadow with me. And that was the first taste of professional strength conditioning, and watching that there was much more to it than just being kind of a meathead in the gym, because John Torine was an outstanding nutritional coach. And he was actually more involved with what they were eating and how they were sleeping than how they were training. And that didn't make any sense to me at 19 years old, because I'm thinking I'm going to walk in and see guys that are way stronger than me, and some of them were bigger than me, obviously in height and everything, but I wasn't really impressed with their numbers in the gym at all. I mean, I had seen stronger guys at the teenage nationals, and I'm at a fucking pro football team thinking that I'm going to be the low man on the totem pole, and I wasn't. And that was an interesting wake up call to thinking maybe this pro sports stuff isn't what I think it is. Now, don't get me wrong. As I walked out and watched them practice and hit each other, that's when I realized that that was a completely different game show than weightlifting. Those guys could play football big time. And so it was interesting to see the shift of mentality of, you need to be insanely big and strong in the gym to be insanely big and strong on the field. And I think there is relevance to it. And I think that you find the guys that tend to put more work in the off season and off the field tend to have longer careers. I mean, if you're a genetic freak and you got to work really hard to get better, or you can just not do anything and still make your 20 million a year, most people are going to choose the lazy way, right?
It's funny because when I was in the weight room a bit as a strength coach, I was more interested in like this conversation that we're having of putting up the numbers, the recovery, the diet, the pre-post workout, what they were drinking and supplementing with while they were working out, what the rest times were. And then you'd have the skills practice, and that was a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And one question that people kind of throw around when they start watching football is, do you think it would benefit some of these linemen who might be on average 370 pounds? Would it benefit them to lose a little bit of weight, to gain weight, to have a healthier diet? And it's like, I don't really know the answer to that question, because if the whole average lineman is now 370 pounds and you're only 320, you're going to get bossed around. You have to have that weight, even if you have a belly running over you, but your cardiovascular conditioning is wonderful and your muscular endurance and your muscular power is on par. You're going to do really well. I mean, look at Jordan Mailata on the Philadelphia Eagles. He's 6'8",
Yeah.
270 pounds, and the dude is just go, 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 go.
Yeah. I think it comes down to, with the line, on how you're going to play your offense or your defense. If you're blocking the pass, or protecting the quarterback because he's not a good runner, he has to stay in the pocket and play, it probably helps to be bigger and just be in the way, right? And not be able to be pushed around. But if you're playing a run game where you got to open up gaps, you might be better off being a little bit leaner so you're faster. And that's why you find defensive linemen tend to be much more athletic than the offensive linemen, just in general, because they're having to chase after the ball, whereas the offensive linemen are just kind of forming a formation to try to stay in the way or whatever. So I think it depends on how the game's being played with the offense and the defense. But I find the most skilled players, the most badass guys that I've ever seen in the pros, are usually defensive ends and tight ends. Those guys have the size, the strength, the speed. They're just out of control. I mean, I remember getting a couple of guys for the Oakland Raiders um, ready for their tryouts and stuff, and the ability for them to get strong was almost unbelievable. I had a guy named Jay Richardson that played on the 2002 national team for Ohio State, and his squat went from 500 to 700 in 12 weeks. And I remember watching that and going, these guys are not human. So again, I think when you see guys in the pros, it's just where they're putting the work in, because a lot of those guys could walk around, they could squat 600 or 700 right now with the right coaching. Well, that becomes the problem, right? Is like, If you're only worried about skill players, and a lot of times the strength conditioning coaches kind of have to play second fiddle to the position coaches. We run into this a lot with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I go up and help them occasionally, and sometimes the strength coach gets 25 minutes to work out with the guys, and sometimes he gets an hour and a half. And the determining factor is how long the skill coaches want to practice with them on the court. So they're basically thought of as secondhand, importance, and that becomes difficult. And you have to be wired a certain way, I think, to be able to withstand that. When you know that a lot of the guys are getting stronger. Like I've been helping Evan Mobley for the last couple of years. He just won Defensive Player of the Year, and all we've been doing is getting him stronger. Because when he came to the league, he already had the skills, but he didn't have the mass, he didn't have the power to be able to do the things that he does now. And it's interesting. You can show this in every sport 100 times over. People that work really hard to get really good, but then you show them the workload that it's going to take to do that, and some people just don't have it. To me, it's interesting.
Do you think a lot of players may not be as interested in strength and conditioning as they are with just playing the game?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem is that that's all they grew up doing. I mean, I'll give you a prime example. When I go out and help the San Diego Padres, I've been helping them for a couple of years. A lot of their players that they get picked in, maybe they're not on the team yet, but they're, 2A or 3A or whatever. They're mostly all foreign. They're mostly South American. You got some players from Mexico. They've never even seen a fucking weight room to play baseball. So when they are already in the pros, that's the first time they see weights. And so it's a cultural shock for them, and it's something that you have to kind of build in slowly, because they've been taught their whole lives by the time they're 18, 19, maybe 20, that they just practice on-field stuff and they don't need weight training. And you don't find that to be much different with basketball. I think the only other sport that probably gets introduced to weights, at least on a consistent basis, would be football. But the amount of high schools that I've went to, and to be in all reality, based on the level of coaching and education, which I'm sure you can attest to, would be far better off if they didn't have a weight program, because they're not doing the right shit. I'm actually working with a high school team right now from Alabama, and some of the videos that I'm getting of the kids lifting is atrocious. The technique is bad, the programming is bad, and we're trying to fix it and make it better. But I can only imagine how many thousands of high schools are like that across the country that are trying to implement weight training, but they don't have the education, they don't have the experience, and furthermore, they don't know how to work with large groups. I mean, it's one thing to be a great coach one-on-one. It's another thing when it's 20 on one or 30 on one. And then you're getting guys that maybe only get paid 25, 30 grand a year to work with 150 athletes a day. You can a lot of times follow the quality of the coach by the pay scale, right? If a job's $400,000 a year, you're going to get a lot better coaching than somebody that's going to offer 36,000. So your average weight room person, you find a lot of the great high school, colleges, etc., have these massive booster programs where they're helping pay for these high level coaches, right? And so that's an issue I think that needs to be addressed. I think the average high school strength coaches are not doing enough to get better. I mean, there's a couple of coaches that I've helped in the past that are 45, 50 years old, and they're still doing the same shit they were doing 20 years ago because they never learned. And it's interesting because my training's changed so much in the last 20 years just from reading and experimenting with not only the people I have in the gym, but like a lot of the different contracts that I have. So it's constantly evolving, or it's reinforcing what I've already been doing. And I find that a lot of these guys that just kind of go by the wayside, follow something from like 1992, like a bigger, faster, stronger program. They don't want to utilize belt squats or posterior chain training. They just think the big three is going to get them where they want to be, and then their technique's not that good. So there's a lot of cumulative issues, I think, that need to be addressed.
It's funny, I was chatting with a practitioner, and I was saying, like, what's the difference between maybe someone who doesn't make it out of high school sports, someone who does make D1, and then someone who makes it to the pros with regard for strength and conditioning, like that context. And he goes, the pros just have a better time at not getting injured and faking the workouts. And it's funny because, like, I mean, you've been in those weight rooms, like this is what you do. You're a professional at this, is that man, some of these guys just don't care. And with like the bench press, it's just like boom, 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 and it's like you can't say anything because they're the ones touching, scoring touchdowns on ESPN, But it's like it makes you cringe, and you go, that youthfulness, those soft tissues aren't going to last forever. So like, can we hone that in to get a huge return on investment?
Yeah, that's a big issue. Is basically tissue resiliency and lack of injury. And I think the big problem that we find right now is in high school, for example, we have a lot of coaches that are just training too many people, right? It's hard to keep your eyes on 20 or 30 people unless you have a particular system, which starts to change what you would do. I think if we could implement it, my ideal would be in the seventh and eighth grade, you're introduced to mostly in the weight room agility and mobility drills. You're just getting in good shape and you're getting mobile. By the time you're a freshman, sophomore, you're going to start learning the mechanics of the lifts, because now if your mobility is already good and your conditioning is already good, then your ability to recover from the weights are increased dramatically, and you're probably more coachable because you have more aesthetic or kinesthetic awareness. Then by junior, senior year, you can actually start pushing the weights up higher. And then that should make it an easy job for the colleges once they get the guys. And so I think a lot of that needs to be broken in the middle school and high school ranks, to where when the colleges get them, they're already realized they're indoctrinated into using strength training for their sport. Their technique, their base technique is already good. Now you get them into the college level where they have reverse hypers, glute ham raises, belt squat machines, higher budgeting for their weight training protocols. And now you're balancing strength with mitigating mileage. And then that's where you start that process where, you're wanting to get the guys stronger, but you're also looking at reducing mileage on the tissue. So by the time they get to the pros in their early mid 20s, they're still super fresh. They still have room to get better, and they already have their environment in which has been drilled into them since seventh grade that weights equal football. But you find that a lot of these players, when they come from these bigger high schools, that even if they have a great weight room, they may not have the great coaches, they may not have great technical capacities. I think the easier part with the pro level is that you're only dealing with a handful of guys, right? Versus in the colleges, you got almost double the amount of players plus walk-ons, right? And really, I think from what I've seen in the pros, the strength coaches don't really mess with walk-ons until they get signed on the team. So I think it's more important for the strength coaches to be better at what they do as far as hard strength training in the right exercises and implements by the time they get to college or late high school, to where you're dealing with a different animal, a grown men versus developing kids.
Do you get any pushback on these ideas? Because this sounds uh, scientific, insightful, and like we're rolling with the times. But do you receive any pushback when you are being asked to consult with teams and someone might shake their head and just say, no, this is the way we've always done things?
Yeah, it happens a lot because the problem is, everybody's ego gets in the way. I've had that issue personally, the last 20 or 30 years, and it's very difficult. I always thought that if I broke world records, that people would listen to the weight training, and you find that that's only partially true. You find that if you work towards master's degrees and PhDs, that people will start listening, and that's only partially true. You find that if you've worked out really hard for like 30 years and never really had any injuries, that people would want to listen to your low mileage aspect of training, and that is rarely true. And it's because the environment or the marketing of physical fitness has become so socially accepted that everything happens fast, that I get a ripped six pack in 30 days by following this program, or I get super strong by following this for only 6 weeks. And I always try to tell people all the time, I'm like, you should be looking at things at least in biannual progressions like 6 months. I got this kid that just came in yesterday. He drove all the way in from Chicago, which is like a 7-hour drive. He's been on online coaching for 6 months. His body fat went from 20% to 14, and he put on 4 pounds of muscle. And he only weighs like 160, so he is not an easy gainer. He's kind of tall and thin. His squat went up 60 pounds in 6 months, and basically just from fixing his technique. So I think the people that already have, I guess my answer to your question is the people that already have long-term mindset, I don't get near as much pushback as people that have short-term mindset and more ego involved. And but yeah, you'll find pushback at every level, right? It's just how much do somebody want to change? Do they want to change? I remember kind of on the same point of what you're talking about. When I was 19, again, I had won my first world championships, and I had run into Louis Simmons at the Arnold Classic, and he's walking out with Dave Tate and Kenny Patterson and all these great lifters. And I get the courage to go up and ask him if I can come in and train with him because I read a lot of his articles in Powerlifting USA. He's like, yeah, sure, come on down, And I come down, and I remember it just being like a sponge. Like he was showing me all these little tiny things that I needed to fix to get better. And I could have looked at that as two ways. One, I could have looked at it as, well, screw this guy. I'm already benching 500 pounds. What does he know? Or I could have looked at it as, this guy's got 7 600 and like 4 700-pound benchers, and he's got to know more than I know. So I'm going to take everything he tells me and I'm going to fix everything. And I think that mindset has helped me out a ton, is the fact that I was willing to drive 3 hours away one way to be the weakest guy and to be treated like I didn't know anything. Whereas most people's ego at that strength level would have already turned them away, I think, from what I've seen.
And it's interesting right now, like how we had started this conversation initially, talking about, social media and the state of, I guess, coaching, training, belief systems right now. I don't know if this is a fair question, but do you wish you can maybe go back in time 20 years to how maybe the fitness industry was, and who were the coaches, who were the experts, who was the practitioners, what information was getting out there? Because again, I was speaking with a guy the other day, and he was like, yeah, I was one of the first people with Muscle and Strength and bodybuilding.com and writing articles. And that's how I gained professional friendships and a lot of clients. And now it's like you go on Instagram and you just see AI written posts about the 3 things you didn't know about this. And it's like, I see my students do it and they're like freshmen. And I'm like, you're failing my anatomy class, yet you're selling yourself as this like expert in strength and conditioning. I'm like, you're 18 years old. You know nothing. So
Yeah.
would you kind of want to go back in time 20 years, or are you happy with how things are progressing now?
If I could have went back 25, I would have liked to have stayed in that generation, right around the year 2000, 2000 to 2003. And maybe it's just I was 20 at that time, so 20 to 23. And what I found is that the people that most lifters and coaches listened to had to earn their right to have a voice. And what I mean by that is when I flipped open Powerlifting USA, the guy that ran the magazine wasn't going to put you in an article, i.e., he wasn't going to let you write an article for that Powerlifting USA magazine unless you were somebody like a Charles Poliquin or a Louis Simmons or someone of that nature, right? Same thing holds true in the 2000s. You look at a lot of the people that were doing research at that time. Zatsiorsky, Kramer was still in his prime. Andy Fry was just first getting started. You got to remember, a lot of the guys that has formulated what we know today as strength conditioning are long since either died or retired. And I find that those were the guys that held the real magic because they were so intrigued with what the Russians and the Bulgarians and the East Germans were doing in the 70s and 80s. And that's what compelled them to learn how to train smarter. And I think that we have lost that capacity and we've lost those researchers. And that's why the strength conditioning realm or the exercise science realm keeps spinning in a fucking circle and never gets any better because we don't learn from our past people. I tell people all the time, if I really want to learn how to train smarter, I open up books that are 50 years old. I don't open up jack shit from today because back then it was a different process. I think, when I read Zatsiorsky's first greenback covered book, it has everything you need to know on how to get better in that book. And then every time they redid the book, they dumbed it down farther to the point it almost lost its capacity because Zatsiorsky wrote it as a Russian scientist that was in charge of all sports in Russia. And then once Kramer got a hold of it, not that it made it worse, but they just tried to relay the information in a different way in that book, and it kind of screwed it up. It made it, if to the person that was really educated in the concurrent or conjugate system, it kind of screwed it up. And then by the time the last one came out, I read it. I'm like, this isn't even the same fucking book, right? And so I find that a lot of the stuff that came out in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s were tend to be a little bit more foundational and solid and secure as far as what they were doing. And that might just be a bias of my age or who I learned from and how all of them are either gone or retired. But I don't see people picking up those pieces and running on with that, right? So that's what I think. I think that around 99 to 2003 was probably the golden era of that stuff.
It's tough now. Like I just turned 30, and when I was, I think, 15, I saw in a like study hall, my friend had like his phone, and like we weren't supposed to have our phones, and he goes, check out this video. And it was a video of Ronnie Coleman training. And to be honest with you, I didn't know what I was looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had no idea anyone could be that big. I knew about like Arnold Schwarzenegger from like the movie Twins, but like I didn't know like he was a bodybuilder. I didn't know bodybuilders could get bigger than that. So for me, it like boomed this whole world. And I went home that day and I typed in on like my mom's laptop or computer, or whatever, and I was like, how to get big and strong muscles. And I was like 15. And what came up, I guess it was like 2010, was bodybuilding.com. And I clicked on the first link, which was Terry Cruz's workout that he did for the Expendables movie. I think it was the first movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get all my babysitting money and I'm going to buy dumbbells and I'm going to start working out at home. And I did that for about 3 years. And I worked out a little bit the YMCA that my dad had a pass to. And that was cool because it was like written by like some master's or PhD or strength coach or something. And I was like, oh, this is like really great. And then something happened where there was this exponential increase in the amount of information that is just flying in your face a million miles an hour. And
Mm-hmm.
like this much is really good. And like this much is like really bad. And I almost hate having posting on like social media about like what I do specifically as a, as a physiologist. That's my trade. I'm a PhD in physiology, but I'm like, because I'm being like bunched together with all these people who don't really know anything. But I could say that with you, you've been doing this for longer than I've been alive. Like you are an expert. That's why I'm having you on the show. I wanted to ask you so many questions.
Yeah,
So
for
like, I
sure.
kind of wish we could go back to that point where some kid's going to be
Yeah.
Googling how to get big and
Yeah, I
strong.
think the internet has done more harm than good. As much as I want to say that it's helped me out tremendously. I'm actually in my PhD right now in kinesiology, so just started my first semester in October. So it's been an eye opener. But I don't think I was ready to do it any earlier because if I was still trying to compete or push these higher crazy numbers, that was my major focus. And now that I don't really do that anymore, it gives me more time to be able to sit down and be more thoughtful. Not that I wasn't being thoughtful with my training, but more so how it applies to a vast population and how my thoughts and actions are, you know, um, displaying different things and stuff like that. That's what we're learning right now in ethics. I just finished my final, but yeah, I think that the problem today is that nobody has to have any credentials to have an opinion or a voice. I don't like busting balls on people and naming people, but you got guys like Jeff Nippard that don't really have any education in what he's doing. As far as I know, he failed out of dentistry school. I'm not even sure he finished his undergraduate, and I know he doesn't have a degree in anything that like you or I do, but for some reason he's got like 10 million followers and everybody wants to listen to what he's talking about with muscle tissue. And again, I'm not hating on him. It's awesome that somebody's been able to do that. But my point being is, what are you doing with that level of responsibility with people, right? Like, to me, if I was in Jeff Nippard's shoes and I wanted to talk about body fat reduction and muscle mass and I wanted to be a science-based lifter, why aren't you working on a PhD? Like, why aren't you trying? That's where I get a little bit confused with Israel getting so much backlash. I think that there was definitely a problem with that dissertation. There were spelling errors and there were errors with the with, I think, the graphing, but at least he went through all the schooling and actually turned in a dissertation, and I think people lose sight of that. I think that guys like you and I that are going through or have been through that kind of schooling realize what it really means to do that kind of shit. I'm not defending him. I think that he could portray some of his information a little better to get a little less backlash. But you find that all these people that are busting these guys' balls don't really have anything to stand on themselves. It'd be one thing if you had other PhDs like Kramer or Zatsiorsky, I think he's still alive in California. If they were on there busting those guys' balls, and I would sit back and put a lot more weight on their selections of what they're picking and what they're arguing and things of that nature. But all these people on the internet that are talking all of this shit, they're not strong. They've never done any level of degree. It's like, be up on somebody's plane and punch straight ahead versus punching down or punching up. You know what I mean? I think that's a huge issue. Is that what we're in an issue right now with kinesiology and strength conditioning and all these relatable fields is that everybody tries to push people around them in the field down to stand up instead of raise everybody up. Because, if you look at the percentage of the amount of people that actually work out more than 2 times a week, I know it's less than 5% of the population. So if we take less than 5% of the population, that means we got how many thousands of coaches fighting over the same 10 million, 20 million people? Like, we're not working together to make everybody better. We're just trying to show that we're the best or we're the smartest or we're this or we're that versus actually looking at what are we doing to improve anybody else. And so when I get on somebody's pages like Instagram or like YouTube, I'm first looking at what is this person trying to help with, and if there is no help for what they're providing, I don't want any part of their channel or their social media. If they're just ripping other people down and they're not showing a better way to do it or showing some other way to make something better in their training or their nutrition or their recovery, what's the point of the video? Just likes and views? I don't see. To me, it's just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think that that's unfortunately where we are right now.
Yeah,
Like, I think that if you watch some of those old like movies, I don't know, like Van Wilder or Animal House or Mean Girls or something, like like why they're so like entertaining is because it's people doing things and losing their minds over things that don't matter. And that's like a child. The child will be like, "Oh, they hit me. They went on the slide before me." It's like a child doesn't understand. Like they don't have a prefrontal cortex yet. Like they're 5, right? And for us, it's like people are, as you were saying, instead of giving someone a little bit of a boost and offering advice and saying, "Hey, let's all raise each other up," they're pushing everyone down by like making reaction videos to someone else's video. It's like Greg Doucette is like the best example of like,
oh my God.
let me just scream in a high pitched voice of why I hate this person. I'm like, yeah, but that dude has more money than we do. you know?
It does. And I get it. Greg Doucette at least was an IFBB pro. Like, I'll give him that. That's cannot be easy. The amount of drug use that you're going to have to do, and the amount of difficulty you're going to have to train to be able to do that. But on the other end of the spectrum, I don't ever notice that I learn anything from his videos,
Yeah.
which is one of my big issues. Right. And I think if you want to be an authority in the area, you need to donate your body and your time and your money in order to be an authority. Take classes, go to school, train really hard, get as genetically proficient as you can at what you want to teach. If somebody wants to learn how to fucking back squat, I'll show you how to do it because I've done it for my whole life, right? I've studied it my whole life. I go to school and spent my own money to like learn how to do that shit. Like that's to me is a master of something. A master of something wouldn't be me having no lifting credentials and no schooling and then just getting on the internet. And because I have a good voice or a great background or great video quality, and I'm just going to bust balls on people that are actually trying to do better. I think that's a huge issue.
Where would you like to see this space go? Because one thing that you had touched upon was with like Jeff Nippert as like an example, and I interviewed a couple of people who are really close with him, are like colleagues with him,
Sure.
and I have full respect. I there's no competition there, and I said, what do you take about Jeff opening up like his own, almost kind of like research facility inside his own house because he's made so many millions of dollars.
Sure.
And they're like, yeah, we're going to go up there in like March and whatever. We're going to do some research. We're going to film a podcast. We're going to get some content, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, that sounds like fun. And they go, but he has no idea what he's up against if he's going to try and publish with a university IRB. It's like, that's that case. I was like, you could be friends with him, colleagues with him, love his videos and content. But I was like, again, as you perfectly said, I mean, now you're going back to school to get a PhD in like your 50s. That's amazing after
Yeah.
you've been an expert in this for so long. And it's like, if you want to publish and go down that route, that's awesome. But I don't think you can take that incredibly non-traditional route and say, I'm going to do it on my own. It's like, there's no, efficacy in there. It might not be reproducible. It might not be viable. It might not have been okayed by a university or hospital system IRB.
Absolutely.
There might be some bias involved in there, some inter-rater intravariability. Like, they have no idea. So I'm like, where would you like to see this field go in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, I think we need, if I could make some changes, I think the big thing would be is the NBA and the NFL need to take some of that profit money, and they need to be providing great facilities for universities to study real athletes, right? That would be one thing I think that we could nail the coffin down on. What is hypertrophy? What are the rep ranges that are ideal? We need elite people to be able to study that. So I think if we could take some of these people that are making money off of highly powerful athletes and bringing that money back into the science. When I was at Ball State with Dr. Kramer and Dr. Newton, we were doing studies with anti-gravity with astronauts because we were still flying pilots up in space, and they would be up in space for anywhere from 10 to 14 days. And when they would come back out, they would be 50% weaker because there was no gravity. And we were trying to figure out how to keep that from happening. A long story short, NASA was very interested in making sure that those astronauts were staying as great of health as they could while they were in outer space. Once they stopped doing that, that funding was gone. And then what I noticed is that my last year as a master's student there is the thought process and the focus was switching over to things that were like biomechanics for limb replacements for military and things like that. And the money drifts where the science goes. If you notice, we really don't have a lot of studies coming out on strength and power right now, not like we did 25 years ago. And the reason is because there's no big money in it, right? Nobody really on the research side gives two shits about muscle mass or power. And so we need to have that funded more. That would be one thing, I think. And then two, I think that if you're in a field and you have some type of, reach as far as like Instagram, and I think that there should be a certain level of proficiency that you should have to be able to post on things. I think that would be something that would be interesting, right? If I, like for me, for example, if I have my YouTube channel has almost 117,000 subscribers, but I find that other people that don't have near the academia or the physical prowess that I had for so many years are doing better just because they work on backlighting and they work on, more of the editing and less of the content that's being provided. I think that if we had it set up to where you had to be some form of educational background in order to be influential in the field, I think that would be helpful, right? Like if Jeff Nippard's making millions of dollars on stuff and he goes back and gets a PhD and he starts working with universities for IRBs, like what you're talking about, I got no fucking problem. I think that's great. But I think that when you have someone that hasn't done the schoolwork, doesn't compete, like I don't think Jeff Nippard's ever really done any pro level bodybuilding shows. Like to me, if your whole goal is to be stronger or be more fit or be this or be that, go and involve your whole life in it for a period of a few decades, and then you can come out and be an expert, right? Like I think I didn't feel like I really knew what was going on until I was really training pretty hard for about 20 years. And in that time, getting a master's degree and doing all these other things, that's when I started really feeling like I had a grasp on what to do. And I had a big picture of how it affected everybody else as well. And like, so when we do like the workouts on the apps or online coaching, we refer back to how these programs have affected somebody that's 70 and somebody that's 19 or 20. right? And where's that middle ground? Because it's all of a gray area. We're making the best guess that we can. But if you only have yourself or maybe a few other people in your age group or genre or gender to take the training and apply it, you have a very bottlenose idea of what's going on because you haven't trained hundreds of different kinds of people at different age groups, different genders, etc. Right. And a lot of what's helped me is training the hundreds of firemen that I've trained the last 20 years, working with those guys because they get poor sleep. They have the shittiest fucking diets you can imagine. They are horrible at doing life decisions. Most of them are divorced. They got houses they can't afford. They got girlfriends with kids with them, and they're paying child support. I mean, all the things you can think of are all in a firehouse. And so seeing how the training adapts to them is a huge factor in how I would address it to a normal person that has normal problems, right? I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but you can see statistics pretty easy in a firehouse, right? Guys get maybe one or no years of college. They want to go into a fire department field. I mean, that's a lot of the population. They end up getting a girl pregnant at 21. Then they have a $90,000 truck they're paying 1,400 a month on. They got a house in an area they can't afford. So they're monetarily strapped. Their stress is through the roof, right? So now, if you can make those guys better, shit, you can make anybody better, right? But if I were to focus only on myself, a person that gets quality sleep, quality recovery, trains really hard, doesn't miss working out, that's a very small portion of the population that's going to be able to put that kind of effort in. It's almost OCD level. um, yeah, I think having that background allows me to make better choices on, you know, what I'm questions that I'm asking, right? Like when somebody wants a strength program from me, the first thing I'm asking them, what do they do for work? How are their sleep habits? What does their normal day and nutrition look like? What would they rate their stress level at 1 to 10, physically, mentally? Those are the things that you start putting the puzzle pieces and you start creating the image of what the training can actually be utilized. Some people can only withstand training 2 days a week because their stress levels are too high. Some people can train every day, depending on if they're independently wealthy and they don't have any problems and they just want to be strong as shit and they don't really deal with stuff. I mean, that's so having all of those different factors in front of you and understanding where to put the pieces together helps out tremendously on what you're dealing with. And if you don't train people from all different backgrounds and different jobs and stress levels, you don't know how all that stuff works. You just think one size fits all, right?
It's funny because I wrote down on a note card the other day because I was frustrated with a couple things. I wrote to myself, like, what makes the biggest and strongest athlete? And underneath I put reps, reps, reps. Like you have to get in there every single day. I mean, obviously not like you don't want to work out every single day, but like, go through periodization cycles, go through weeks, months, and years and work with these different variables. And that's the
I
exact
didn't
same.
realize that those variables are changing constantly.
Yeah. And that's like, that was the point that I was touching on with you, is that there's going to be days when you're tired. There's days when you're pumped up. There's days when the gym is packed. It's hot. It's cold. You're not feeling good. X, Y, and Z. This machine is broken. This person's texting on their phone while you're trying to get on a leg extension, like whatever it is. And you have to put in those reps weeks, months, and years to get a full understanding. As you said, it took you 20 years until you're like, hey, I think I know what I'm doing here. And I think a lot of people are trying to, like, instead of going A to B to C to D, they're trying to go A to Z. And it's like, no, 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 no. You can't shortcut this thing.
No, you
And I
can't
love that.
go up 5 steps from step one to step five. Everything has to be created. And that's where I figured out basically right after that 20-year period is I started figuring out that I'd go into the gym and feel like what you're saying. Like some days I walk in, man, I don't feel so hot. I don't feel like I can train as hard as I did, 3, 4 days ago. And that's when the winning warm-ups started. So I was in 2012, I was speaking in Australia, and there was a lady that was getting a PhD from a rugby team. And she was working with a rugby team to collect her data. And she started talking about this post activation potentiation stuff and built into a warm up. And I'm like, man, I don't fucking do anything like that. But I didn't go home and do it right away. I ended up going to a meet. It's my first completely raw meet, just a belt, no knee wraps, no nothing. and I hit the third highest total of all time. But I would have hit the first highest or the best total, the all time world record. But for some reason, after that squat, my bench wasn't there anymore. 7, 8 months prior to that, I had hit my first 600 raw in competition. And so I go to the meet and I'm banking on this kilos 606 or 611 bench. And I hit this 800-pound raw squat in just a belt. And I go to bench 600 and it's not there. And so I pull whatever I needed to pull to get the third highest total of all time. And I'm driving home and I'm like, my first inclination is how do I get stronger? Because I got another goal in mind. I get this world record total I could do raw. And as I'm driving home, for some reason, that post activation potentiation talk clicked into my head. And I started going, you know what? Maybe I'm not fit enough to hit the 600 bench after a world record squat. Because you got to keep in mind, when I did that 800 squat, the world record was only 826. I was 26 pounds away. And so I started implementing it just for the bench press, started doing 4 sets of 25 dumbbells. I'm like, well, if I can do something for 25, it's not going to affect a 1 rep max because the percentage range is way higher. Then I started reading stuff on Vorbiev, which is another high level guy over in Russia. And he talked about ligament tendon density being developed at higher repetition ranges with lower intensity. And I'm like, well, I don't really do anything like that. I either go till failure because, as a hypertrophy will tell you, you want to go close to failure. So we did that for a lot of accessories. And then for our main list, we either went heavy as shit or we went fast as shit. So we worked both sides of the force velocity curve, right? But I didn't do anything just light just to get everything prepped. Long story short, I go to the first Raw Unity meet and I squat the all time world record. So I raise it to 832 and then I bench 606 and it was like a fucking speed rep. And I was like, man, I'm on to something. I got fitter and I got stronger. So it wasn't just about being strong. I was actually recovering better through my workouts. So then I implemented it over the next year with squats and deadlifts, and I took the world record total. So it was all about getting more conditioned to get stronger. That was the weak link. And that's the thing with concurrent or conjugate system, and why I really don't find an equal in its training systems is because when utilized correctly, if you look at Vorbiev and Medvedev's work, and even Bondarchuk, which was a throwing coach, they talk a lot about how the workouts are segmented by fixing shortcomings. 60 to 70% of your workout should be to develop the lagging muscle group areas. And I'm like, son of a bitch. For me, it was conditioning because I was 310 pounds. Once that conditioning went up, 611 bench was easy. I probably could have done 622 or 32, and the 900-pound raw squat was not that hard. And that's where I started to realize how important conditioning was to the strength protocol. Because once you get past those beginner strength gains, if you don't get fitter, you're not going to be able to train hard enough to recover. Right. So all of that stuff plays a huge component in how you get better, but it's finding the weaknesses and fixing them at all costs at all times. Right, so now instead of just doing reps, like what you're saying, we can take it up to another level and say the reps need to be dedicated towards my shortcomings, not my strengths. Because most people, when they go in the gym, they're going to train what they like to train and they're going to avoid the shit they suck at. Whereas we go in and attack the things we suck at, and then that makes the things we like easier.
Yeah, that's you being an honest scientist.
Yeah.
An honest and a curious scientist. And it's not just showing up every day and like working hard as you possibly can. It's saying like, how do I work hard but also work smarter?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why like you've been able to do what you've been able to do, and you work with some of like the best athletes in the world. Like
Yeah.
it kind of bugs me. Like I always ask people, I'm like, oh, what's like your perfect day look like? Your perfect life look like? And the amount of people who will say something along the lines of, I haven't really thought about it. I'm like, you're the complete opposite of what we're just talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a level of obsession and dedication and love that you will do whatever it takes to get better at what you want to do for this limited time that we do have.
But think about it. We can't even get people hardly to go to the gym, let alone work their weaknesses. So there's your problem. So if I were to say, and I try to say this on every podcast, focus on your hamstrings. Your hamstrings tie into your lower back, they protect your lower back, and they make the knee function correctly and protect it. Make sure your glutes are constantly activated and firing along with your TVA. Those two muscle groups, when not playing correctly, allow the lumbar to do way more of the work than it should, which ends up screwing up your technique and your level of strength, right? The next thing is you got to focus on small muscles. If you're making sure your rotator cuff is flexible and strong, you're making sure your triceps are the most dominant pressing muscle so it doesn't rely on pecs and anterior delts. It makes your bench press position in a straighter line, which is more protective. I don't know if you saw it on my Instagram, but I posted a couple of videos. One guy died in the bench press from dropping it, and another guy basically almost choked himself out to death. And if they would have had the right positioning, the right hand positioning, the right muscle groups firing, none of that would have happened, right? But people think that just going in and working harder is going to get you better. And eventually it's got to be smarter, and you got to put that energy in the right places. I always look at it like when you walk into the gym, you have a cup full of water, whether you know it or not. And how deep that cup is how much energy you can apply to training. And so you need to use that energy as most important pieces first. So if your triceps and lats are lagging and you want your bench press to go up, doing more pec deck is not going to help. It's actually going to hurt, right? But most people think that the bench press is a chest exercise because that's what we were told in middle school and high school and all those fucking magazines that we listened to when we were kids. And it's really an arm exercise if you do it correctly. The same thing with squats. Like people do squats because they want to build their quads. But in reality, you should be doing squats to build your hamstrings and your glutes, and your quads will grow automatically, right? So it all comes back down to technical proficiency, focusing on muscle groups that don't want to fire. And that's why one of the biggest red flags that I can see as a coach is when another coach says, just do it how it feels comfortable. Because usually when you're doing something the way it feels comfortable when you're a beginner is the exact fucking wrong way to do it because you don't have the right muscles yet to do it right. So usually when we bring in a new athlete and they're squatting, I'm not letting them squat the way they want to. I'm fixing their technique right off the rip. And it's going to be a longer road to get them better. But then once we got that as a solid motor pattern, I can strain the shit out of them and they don't get hurt. But are you willing to take 6 months or a year to get all those muscle imbalances corrected? And that's being quick. I would say most times muscle imbalances are usually a 30 to 36-month process, depending on how old you are. That's why if you look at the Russian, the Bulgarian, and the Eastern Bloc systems, they started all the athletes around gymnastics and tumbling around age 6. They didn't start specializing until around 11 or 12. Gymnastics might be a little bit different, but a lot of the other developmental sports are like that. And the reason is because imagine taking a kid and teaching him how to play football if he can already walk on his hands and do a 10-foot broad jump, right? Like it's going to be way easier than some kid that doesn't even know how to control his body. And so what I find is that most people don't get involved with weight training until 15, 16, 18, maybe 20. And now your whole life up to that point has been just firing on instinctive movements, watching your parents and how they move, which is probably completely terrible unless they're great athletes. So you find that the longer you wait to do it right, the longer it takes to fix it.
Absolutely. No, and I think that goes back so well to like what we were talking about before of like, what's the long-term athlete development model look like? And we were saying that like we need to get kids up and mobile, or you said that, in like 8th grade, 9th grade, just get them like working on agility, some plyometrics, healthy movement patterns. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Avery Feigenbaum, who's like the OG researcher on like youth athlete development. Like I met him, amazing research on that. And then you can start applying those and start progressively overloading in your teens so that by the time you're playing varsity sports, you're actually healthy. And
Yeah.
you're not all
I'm
funky.
going to read. There's a guy named Istvan Bali. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's from Canada. He has gotten from 4 to 5 years old, 400 people in the NHL.
Holy cow.
Yeah, unreal. And he studied a lot of the old Eastern Bloc Soviet literature. I have a couple of his books that I use when people ask me about child training, but he's the first guy I've seen to bring some of that Eastern Bloc information over. And he basically calls it like a 5-step athlete progression model. And he says everything starts at 4. So like 4 to 7 is where most of your flexibility, mobility is created. You can get better after that, but if you're not focusing on that area at that time, it's a huge window. And then the next one is like coordination and like stability. And then it goes into strength and then these other factors. But it shows what they focus on throughout those year time points to where if you look at a guy like Hafthor Bjorgesson, right, like the big world's strongest man, he started playing basketball around 4 or 5 years old. And I go, how in the fuck are you that flexible that when you go down and grab a deadlift bar, he looks like he's like our height or shorter? Like he sets his hips down, pulls his chest up. I'm like, how is he doing that at 6'8.5"? And I was asking him on my podcast, and he said he had a basketball coach from the age of 5 to 10 that made them stretch for 1 hour a day. So he was stretching an hour a day at 5 to 10 years old, and now he's got that flexibility drilled in. So now when he puts all that muscle on top, he has the proper mobility to do everything correctly, right?
And that like that's going to also just decrease incidences of injury.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what a lot of people don't have. And even like I coach a lot of runners because like I'm very much in like the running community. And man, like the world record holder, like sort of thing like Kipchoge, who ran like the 159 marathon on like the whole Monza course, he can't
Brutal.
bend down and touch his toes. But they
That type.
look at that and they say, like, if you look at the biomechanics of running, when you have the eccentric phase, the initial isometric, then the concentric of pushing off, you want very
Stiff.
taut, stiff hamstrings and glutes to spring you off. And it looks like he's
Mm-hmm.
riding a bike with like his 180
Well,
cadence per minute
so
on.
basically, what you're saying is 70% or so of his capacity to run is all due to stretch shortening cycle and stretch reflex. It has nothing to do with his muscle capacity.
Yeah, like
Right.
he's got endurance and like his lactate clearance is very efficient. But yeah, like he's not flexible, and that's actually really good. Whereas if you have someone who's over flexible, they're going to overstride and they're going to lose a lot of power in that eccentric phase of running, and it's like
Yeah, it's
that's
all
disadvantageous.
optimization.
Yeah,
Like what you're saying, it's all optimization, and everybody's different. They can be built on top of that. But my question would be, what if he was moderately flexible and developed that when he was a small child on top of the running? Maybe he would be doing it 149.
I mean I don't know. Now he's like 37, 38, so he kind of peaked. But like that, those are also considerations because people
Yeah,
weren't having these conversations maybe 10, 15 years ago. Who
right.
knows? I hope we can see that in the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's going to be a developmental process, and I'm not sure what it's going to take to do that. But usually, everything comes back down to money, right? If there's a ton of money involved with it, there's usually good research involved, right? Like, there's a reason that we keep advancing, or however you want to look at it, advancing the medical field, is because when somebody makes a new drug, they make billions of dollars. If I make 10 guys crazy fucking strong, nobody makes $1 on that, and that's why you don't see quality research in the area, in my opinion.
Yeah, where can people find out with what you're doing in your YouTube and your Instagram so they can keep going with this? I got to head out soon, but this was
Yeah.
amazing. This was way more scientific than I thought it was going to be, and this was so much fun.
Well, I'm a meathead, but I do a lot of reading. So you can go to Winning Strength. That's the YouTube channel. And then we have Winning Strength on Instagram as well as Winning Strong. That's my private page. And then if you go to Train Heroic, we have all the apps. We have Conjugate Elite, where I will watch your technique when you squat and give you feedback if you post it on the message board. Then I have regular Conjugate, which is cheaper, where I don't give as much feedback, but you can see the workouts that we're doing. And then we have Tactical for my police, fire, military guys. We have some SEAL team members on there, Delta Force guys, and my firemen. Then we have a Conjugate Express, which is 3 times a week. So for people that are maybe a little bit more limited in time. And then we have a Recomp one, which what I usually do with my older clientele that need a little bit more muscle mass and need a little bit less body fat and just need to be overall shape, but their major goal is not to be stronger per se. It's just to be fitter and just be more healthy. Then we got some other ones on there as well, but those are our big areas that we attack and have a lot of people on. And then we do online coaching as well on the website. So for a lot of people that don't know, I do online coaching for Stone Cold Steve Austin. I've actually done online coaching for Terry Crews, which is interesting. You bring him up. So we've had some pretty awesome people on those online coaching spots.
I didn't know you were big into. Are you big into WWE?
No, not really, but it's funny. I can give you a small quick story on Stone Cold. So like 2023, maybe 22, I wake up in the morning and I get like 6 or 8 DMs on my Instagram, like, dude, Stone Cold Steve Austin's following you. And I'm like, okay, I mean, that's kind of cool. I know who he is. Well, I click on it. He's only following like 60 people back out of 5 million that he has. So if he follows you, it was kind of a big deal. So I click on it and I just message him, hey man, thanks for the follow. Glad you're on this page. And that's when we started talking. And then I rode my motorcycle out from Ohio all the way to Nevada and stayed at his house for a while and helped him with the whole workout and built him all up and, got his little home gym all situated. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, I never really was like I'm probably more of a Hulk Hogan Ultimate Warrior,
Just get
like
the, what's that,
10
brother?
years, yeah, 10 years older than that, because that's when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11.
Yeah.
By the time like Stone Cold was a big timer, I was already like in high school, college. So it was kind of like it was cool to watch people doing stupid shit, but to me I wasn't a little kid anymore by the time he was wrestling. But it was interesting to have the feedback with him. I still talk to him, and he likes to see my car projects and stuff coming together. So
Oh, it's awesome. I love WWE. My brother works with Netflix Live. So like they put on like the Monday Night Raw and everything. And like I got to see like a Raw show in Tampa, Florida. And that was awesome. And I love like Cody Rhodes and John Cena. So I love like the acrobatics and like the trying not to get injured aspect. That's what I find brilliant is like,
God,
how do
those
you
guys,
not become paralyzed?
I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see how well those guys age into their 50s and 60s. Because I'll tell you this right now, Stone Cold is beat up.
So was Kurt Angle
Every
and The
yeah,
Undertaker, Shawn Michaels. They look terrible. They don't even walk
yeah,
straight.
no. I mean, Stone Cold's had a knee replacement. He's had his spine fused. He's had, I think, an elbow surgery. I'm trying to remember all the stuff that we had to put together for his training, but it was like picking pieces up and trying to figure out how do we do these exercises, which ones hurt, which ones don't. It was a huge undertaking to figure out which exercises he could do and what we could apply.
Yeah, no, I love it. You see some of those guys down in like Orlando and even the CTE conversation too of just
Oh,
repeated micro head traumas. Like as much as I love WWE, I'm like, I'm kind of happy I'm a spectator and not a talent.
well, and even as good as the football helmets are now, I trained a guy named Mike Kula. Mike Kula had the 225 rep record for the NFL. Probably, I want to say 2006 to 2012. He did 47 reps with 225, and he trained with me. And he had so many CTEs that he'd forget where he was at parking somewhere. He ended up taking his own life because he would just black out, and it was a bad situation because we were the last ones to eat with him. So his parents were like, "Was he acting weird? Like, what was wrong?" And I was like, "He was acting totally fine." That was what was really crazy about that whole situation. That happened in 2018. We got done working out. We went to eat at this hibachi steakhouse, and then we went off our separate ways. And that night, he killed himself from CTEs. It's crazy. And he was a 4.0 student in the business college while he was an All-American football player. So it wasn't like he was just kind of a meathead and his time was up and he was depressed about not playing football anymore. He was running like multi-million dollar businesses with his business degree, and it still didn't help at all. It was crazy.
Jeez. Well,
Yeah.
on that,
Yeah.
we'll have to run this back in a little bit because I'm gonna have like I have a whole Google Doc of things I didn't ask you today because we were just shooting from the hip. But this was
We'll
fun.
do another one sometime. Just holler at me.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. This was awesome.
All right, brother. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Alrighty.